I'm going to do a few short introductions, and then we'll get into the questions. None of these people really need intros, but I'll do it anyway. Stephen Knight, I'm going to start with this, is one of the creators of the game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and the author of 4 novels, including Alphabet City. His film credits include Pablo Larraín's Spencer, which is actually premiering here at LFF tonight, The Girl in the Spider's Web starring Claire Foy, and Lockdown from Doug Liman. Meanwhile, for TV, he's behind the hit show Peaky Blinders, C for Apple, and the forthcoming Great Expectations for BBC and FX. Lucy Prebble writes for film, TV, video games, and theater. She is executive producer and writer on HBO's hit drama Succession, which is also, I believe, they're showing a couple of episodes here at the festival too. For Succession, she's won Writers Guild and Producers Guild awards. Recently, she also wrote and co-created Sky's wonderful original drama I Hate Suzie with Billie Piper, and her theater credits include the political thriller A Very Expensive Poison and Enron. And last but not least, Jack Thorne writes for film, TV, and theater. His recent drama Help for Channel 4 was set in a Liverpool care home during COVID, while other TV credits include HBO and BBC's His Dark Materials, The Virtues, and National Treasure. For film, he's written The Aeronauts and Wonder with Julia Roberts. And for theater, he was behind the hit staging of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. So just a few small titles that no one's ever heard of. Right, so all of you seem to sort of flit quite effortlessly between film, TV, and theater and the stage. How do you sort of decide what shape an idea will take, and how has that sort of process changed in recent years, would you say? Stephen, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think it's been a great thing for writers, the explosion of returning TV. I think it's much more of a writer's medium than film, even though film is obviously, they're of equal importance. Well, for me, they're of equal importance. And I think the difference in terms of when you sit down at the keyboard, I think in spirit they're the same. I think you have to be practical about what stories you're going to tell. And I think what TV has given you is the possibility of like 28 hours of screen time to tell a story, and so I think you have to select the stories that you're going to tell in the shorter medium of the cinema. Sure.
Lucy, you've obviously wrote a lot for stage, and now you're doing TV and some film, I presume, as well in the future. Can you tell us a little bit about?
Sure. Oh, sorry, I feel like I'm in an industry version of Blind Date.
I was going to say, it's not expecting this.
What I would do on a TV date. No, sorry, that would be people too young to understand that. I'm sorry. So I did theatre. I'm very sceptical of ideas that I have that don't come with the medium within them when I have the idea. So, for example, A Very Expensive Poison is a play that I did that I read Luke Harding's book about the murder of Alexander Litvinenko, who was murdered in London in 2006. And as soon as I was reading it, I had this feeling of how it's all about how the Kremlin has told the story as compared to how Britain has told the story, and that there was a meta-theatrical way of doing it. There was a way of doing it that could only really be on stage with lots of people trying to tell the same story. And so the form of it arrived at the same time as the idea. And with something like I Hate Suzie, which is the TV show I did recently with Billie Piper, in the idea of a celebrity who has her phone hacked and then basically his life falls apart as a result, in my head, as soon I was imagining just being incredibly close on the face of the person throughout, like seeing just in her eyes, almost like as close as you are to your phone screen all of the time, and that sort of dark reflection constantly. And that can only be done with a camera, obviously. And so I guess I've moved between them, but always in a way because the idea has led me there first. When I have an idea that I'm not really sure what it is, I get quite nervous of that idea. I feel a little bit like, well, maybe if I come back to it, I'll know. But if it's not clear to me quite quickly whether it's a stage play or a novel, if I would love to write a novel one day, but I never have, because I've never had an idea that I feel like could be a novel.
Got it. What about for you, Jack?
I first met
Other than gratitude, okay, amazing. What for people starting out right now, would you say that there's any sort of platform or medium that's a bit more forgiving, perhaps, or perhaps in COVID times? Like, what would you say, or any sort of observations for kind of beginners?
So this is maybe obvious, but making stuff with what you have available. I think I started in theatre not because I particularly had an adoration of theatre above all other art forms, but because there were friends that I went to university with who wanted to be actors, who were around, who wanted to make stuff. So it's often been the cheapest way of getting your writing performed or seen. But I'm not sure if that's true anymore. So I think making art with what you have, which maybe now is more about cameras and videos and editing, is a really good idea. Not to maybe not to always be waiting for someone to give you an opportunity, rather than maybe taking something to them to show them is sometimes better.
Yeah. Stephen, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would consider radio as well. I think radio is fantastic. I love it, especially for writers, because it's just the voice. And if there's a way of presenting something on radio that works, I think it's a challenge, but I think it would be really good. I think theatre, you're right. It's, you can just go up, turn up and do it. But increasingly with the democratization of the technology to make stuff, I think there probably is a world where you can just use what you have in your hand and make things, and at least discover the difference between what's written and what it looks like, which is, I think, the big shock for any writer when you first start, is you write something and think it's going to look like something, and it always looks like something else. And it's just the gap between those two is something you have to really get used to.
Sure. I wanted to ask about sort of, I guess, not to bang on too much about COVID, but just because it has affected theater so drastically. And I'm curious, how you're finding, I guess, has it changed the types of things that you're writing for the stage? Because producers, I suppose now, and folks who are putting on these productions are maybe more risk averse, because people are still afraid to go back to theater, and they're taking their time in terms of coming back. Has that changed the types of content that they're looking for as well? Sort of.
I haven't really sensed that. I haven't really sensed that there's demands on me. I think more of a problem with new voices. I work a lot in the disability sector, and there is a genuine concern that where there was an appetite for new things, that theatre is now protecting itself, and that in protecting itself, it perhaps won't have the same sort of open door to the possibility of the new. And it's a scary time for new voices because of that. I'd say the same is probably true of television too, and I think we are going through a period where risk aversion will lead to the same voices being trusted rather than new voices being trusted, and we need to get past that very quickly. Otherwise, it'll damage the sector, but it'll also damage society as a whole, because I do think television theatre has a responsibility to society, and when it doesn't meet that responsibility, everyone suffers.
It's an interesting paradox, though, isn't it? Because all of this is sort of, obviously we had this huge reckoning last year with the renewed sort of Black Lives Matter movement, and it seems as though now there's actually all sorts of literature and research that's being published. Film and TV charities doing some great work that's coming out and saying, actually, there are a lot of schemes now, but how effective are they? And it's a weird paradox, isn't it? Because, as you say, people might very well be risk averse going forward, and yet they're also trying to bring sort of people through. Meanwhile, sort of older demographics within the industry are perhaps forgotten to, as I guess broadcasters and studios rush to kind of introduce new talent.
Yeah, I worry about it for theatre particularly, because obviously it's a live art form, so it's been particularly vulnerable. As you say, it felt like there was a pressure for change that was happening at exactly the point that COVID hit. And I think that some of the arguments from some of the more powerful gatekeepers in theatre who were already maybe trying to stress how difficult it was to balance the books anyway, have now been given quite a strong double down argument on that. And so, as you say, that can cause risk of aversion. However, there's also an assumption inherent in that, which I would wonder about sometimes, which is this idea that new challenging work by more diverse artists will automatically be less profitable on some level. And there's something about that I think is there's something a bit abhorrent at its centre that isn't true, and that although there's some economic concepts that I do understand about it, I think the industry was dying from the other end anyway. And I mean that without being horrible about literally dying in terms of filling some theatres, like the age group of people who are attending. So there's an economic pressure actually to stay alive in a different way and being exciting and relevant. And the most massively profitable show that we all know of the last decade, Hamilton, is not a show that is living in a particularly old audience demographic or behaving in a sort of very old-fashioned way on stage. So I think that's worth saying. But the thing that troubles me a little bit about it is I don't think the rest of the industries have ever quite paid homage to how much theatre has fed them. So the artists that are struggling now, to particularly begin, they are if they want to be, the television writers and the film writers of potentially 10, 15 years' time. And I certainly know that Jack and I had a career a bit like that, I think. So I think there's people think, that overheard Cummings statement of sort of the ballet dancers can be at the back of the line. There's a quality to that I just think really doesn't understand how much everything else is dependent on that. And you will see that in 10, 15 years if those people haven't come up. You will see that in the quality of the art and what's being produced if they haven't done their training. Not everyone has to do their training in theatre, obviously, but it's a huge provider of artists to the rest of the sectors. And I just think that's not quite acknowledged sometimes.
Got it. And what are you guys specifically, doing, I suppose, in terms of mentorship and in your respective writers' rooms as well? Like, how are you trying to kind of cultivate new voices individually on an individual level? Stephen, did you?
Yeah, a lot of projects that one embarks on it's going to be a group process, and I think absolutely echoing your point, which is that I think you get the best writers to come in, and the best writers will be diverse. It's not a question of, no, I've got to make it diverse, and there's no reason why a writer from a different background isn't going to be brilliant. That the assumption that it's somehow an obstacle is completely wrong, because all you're doing is finding the best writers, and naturally, inevitably, totally, the best writers will come from different backgrounds. They definitely will.
In terms of what we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
Personally, my focus is very much on disability, and so it's about supporting, execing, and co-writing. I've been co-writing with a woman called Genevieve Barr for the last year or so, and she's extraordinary, and so trying to push that as much as possible, failing massively all the time, but trying very hard with Jen and lots of other writers like Jen. And I'm involved in this campaign, Underlying Health Condition, which we're going to launch in December, which is specifically about making television spaces accessible, because they really aren't. And when you hear stories, as I have a number of times, of people having to travel 40 minutes to use a toilet because there are no accessible toilets nearby, that's a real problem for our industry. And so looking specifically at that and trying to push a new agenda where that is concerned.
That's amazing, and that campaign's launching this fall.
In December 3rd, International Day of Disability.
Fantastic. Lucy, you guys have a good writer's room as well for Succession, don't you?
Yes, we do. I have a number of mentees, or young women actually, We also have writers who come into the writers' room of Succession, and we had a particular embedded writer working with us called Bryson, who's amazing, who's basically on set also all of the time, learning about how a TV show is run. But I do a lot of mentoring, but I also think it's worth pointing something out, and I love doing it. I think it's great. It's I learn as much, etc., as they do, but I think there's something quite individualistic and capitalistic about the emphasis on mentorship that sometimes happens. Often when I'm asked to mentor someone, I get asked frequently, like it's a constant. I sometimes, when I say, if I feel like I'm already mentoring half a dozen people and I want to give them my time, I say, firstly, how many men are you asking to do this? Because I find that interesting. Often, sometimes it's just as much. Sometimes it isn't, because they're trying to get young women into the industry and they always ask women to mentor them, which again is fine, but I always think it's worth considering that, like in terms of where the professional pressure is going. And also, I think there's been a replacement of where there used to be huge numbers of very, very established schemes throughout the industry, particularly at the BBC. There's been a replacement of that idea sometimes for individuals, in terms of like it's individuals and individuals who should be taking responsibility, who should be giving back, and I agree it is, and I do that work. But I also sometimes want to point out that it's sometimes a replacement for large institutions and large companies who are the ones who make the most money of things like television for seeing to that themselves. And that's just something I've noticed as I get more and more requests for mentorships that I feel is worth pointing out.
That's very interesting, right? Yeah, obviously they need to sort of step up and sort of we need to restructure that system as well.
It's a great thing, and some of that has come through production companies. I mentioned a production company called Dancing Ledge, who set it up themselves. Brilliant writer called Temi Wilkin, who now writes for Sex Education. She's amazing. I've done that, and sometimes it is production companies doing it, but sometimes it's individuals taking responsibility on themselves to approach people. And sometimes I'm like, well, where are the institutions and structures that should be providing this for themselves?
Yeah, totally fair enough.
And I mean, I'm trying to. This may be of interest actually, practically to people who. I'm setting up a studio in Birmingham, which will be film and television, and along with the BFI and the Birmingham City University and the BBC Academy, we are going to create a thing called Second Unit, where people who are students who want to join the industry can actually get practical experience on productions, because I think for too long productions have taken very enthusiastic, very talented young people and paid them nothing and had them making coffee and running around and doing nothing. It's a real shame. And I think you're right, there needs to be actual structures in place where people, it's really bad that someone who is so enthusiastic, who is potentially so great, gets sort of forgotten and left alone and left out. Whereas if there's a system for it through the universities, we're opening a Birmingham Film Academy, which is basically a new branch of the London Film Academy, to teach people who are crew as well, who are doing the crafts, so that we've got a place where people can feel comfortable to do the work that they're doing, but they're doing it in an environment which is actually the environment that they will be working in. So that's to be announced quite soon, but it will all be in Birmingham. A lot of it will be based on Birmingham postcodes, using people from that area, but it will also be national as well.
That's brilliant. Very interesting. I wanted to sort of turn attention to the streamers, obviously, because they really have changed the game. We're seeing we'll get into that, the rules for Britishness, which are bananas. But I'm just wondering, what would you say is the difference between writing a show that's going to land only on, for example, Channel 4, versus something that's a co-production now between a broadcaster and Netflix? How do you sort of go about that interesting? I mean, obviously there was a few years ago, there was a lot of worry about the co-production tap being turned off. Clearly that's not the case. The streamers still very much seem to be wanting to work closely with the PSBs here. But is there a little bit of a different approach? Like, Jack, could you talk a little bit about Help, and could that have been on Netflix perhaps, or no?
Help was in a privileged position because we had two very superstar actors in it, and so we were helped enormously by that. I think Blind Date's becoming quite depressing. But just to say, I'm a bit worried by the streamer thing, and I'm worried about the local, because I think the global, yeah, we're doing great, but the trouble is that it costs a lot more to make a show now. Because there's been enormous inflationary pressures on the cost of crew and everything else, and that's great because it means the crew are getting paid better and everything else. But it does also mean that there's a scarcity of spaces and there's a scarcity of people to work on your show. And if you are a Netflix and you own 4 studios and you can use those studio spaces to make stuff, then you're in a very privileged position. And if you are the next Jimmy McGovern, or the next Alan Bleasdale, or the next Sally Wainwright, and you're making shows about Britain, and I know we're going to get onto Britishness later, it's harder and harder to make that stuff because you can't attract American money in order to make a show about the British prison system, because Americans are going to be like, well, we've got our own prison system, so we'll make our own show about that. Whereas we really do need those stories told. And again, it's going back to the responsibility of TV. You know, that I think that social realism is one of Britain's finest genres, and being able to tell those stories is something that's really vital. And I don't quite know what the future is for those things in this global marketplace.
That's interesting. Lucy, did you have any thoughts?
That's really interesting. It's funny. I was having a meeting only the other day. I was pitching a sort of social realist thing, and I could feel them all get quite depressed in the room. It was one of those things, and I was like, this is what we do brilliantly. Like, if you think historic, and actually there isn't much on like that now. So in a marketplace where they claim to want to stand out, I was saying this is what will make it stand out, and you'll actually, shoot it like this, and and I could feel them all going, like basically it'll be people shouting, it'll feel dull, and it won't look very bright, and how will we market it? And I was just thinking, that was literally yesterday, and I did think, oh, that feels weird, because you're absolutely right. The other thing I would say that I'm noticing, which is scary in the global marketplace of all this, is because the only thing that makes people click now is often if they recognize somebody in it, a bit like movies with casting, there's actually only a limited number of people who are famous enough to get people to click. So their cachet is extremely high, whether they're great actors or not. And what then happens is there aren't enough people to go around to be paid less, if you see what I mean. So the British shows, which just don't have the same budget as the things that we're talking about, will say to a really, really good, high quality and famous actor, would you like to be in this? And they'll go, well, for literally a quarter, a fifth of the amount of money, less even than I would be paid to be in the equivalent on a big American or streamer. No, because why would I do that given the choice, and when the work is good as well in the other place? And so you then end up siphoning off all of the people who get people to watch stuff in the first place, even if when they then watch it, they like it. And that creates a really, really dangerous marketplace situation where you'll find that BBC and Channel 4, as is already happening on British channels themselves, are spiraling slightly, not being able to find the money to draw what they would call the talent away from those things. And I think that's probably only going to get worse, maybe.
I mean, it is quite incredible. Jodie Comer and Stephen Graham, as you say, global talents at this point. That's a Channel 4 only commissioned show, isn't it, Jack? For help.
We also have money from all three, who then we're on Acorn in the States. So, but yes, it's a show about Liverpool. It's not a show that's going to have great big global reach because it's very, very specific to the care home crisis that happened in this country and the city of Liverpool, which is a city that sounds different to the noise that most Americans expect British people to sound like. They don't sound like Benedict Cumberbatch there.
So what do you, Stephen? Sorry.
I mean, I would add a slight note of optimism in that there's so much going on. That there is so much happening. There's so much television going on. There's so much material being shot. There's so much stuff being made, and that's got to be a good thing. I mean, I'm sure it's got its drawbacks, and I also think when it comes to English and Britishness and making content that is definitely British. I think I've always thought that we don't have the sort of arrogance to take something local and make it mythological, or make it like a Western. The Americans take 19th century agricultural labourers and make them cowboys and create a genre that's a Western, and there's no difference. There's no difference between their the poverty in America, the poverty here. That there is a way, I think, that one can take a regional story about working class people and make it, if you like, mythological, and then hope that it will strike a chord. You know what I mean? What I'm trying to say is there is a lot of hope out there for English writers writing about English things. That I don't think that ability that Britain has always had is going to necessarily disappear or be buried. I hope.
Got it. Well, I mean, just to sort of, to remind everybody, effectively, this very interesting development last month when John Whittingdale, a day before he was sacked, set out these rules to protect distinctively British content. So I have a little, in their communications, the government said, the globalization, I quote, the globalization of broadcasting means that more of the content we watch is set in non-specific locations or outside the UK with an international cast communicating in US English. This risks TV made in the UK becoming indistinguishable from that produced elsewhere and less relevant for UK audiences, as well as minimizing its proven soft power abroad. So, I mean, so obviously these rules are actually going to be set out in a white paper later this year as well, which I await with bated breath.
They're
but
actual rules.
They're rules that are going to be set out for the PSBs to make sure their content is more British. But what do you, and I was speaking with someone who heads a super indie who just said, we're just not going to ignore them because everything we do is British. But what do you think as writers? Because obviously, presumably, you'll be, you'll be affected by these rules.
I don't. Well, in a way, though, what's weird is that's a bit. There's a kernel of truth in it because it's what you were expressing just now.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm saying you agree with the Tories stuff.
So it could be quite good for you, Jack.
This could be
and the shows they were talking about were Only Fools and Horses and all that stuff, wasn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like, they weren't necessarily talking about Boys from the Black stuff, but that might be something they're very passionate about. But I don't think so.
But presumably, I mean, it would, something like this would actually, because I know you've talked previously as well, right, about how having streamers more involved, basically dilutes the British stories that are being told, because there is that thread of something needing to work universally and not kind of hitting specifically for the home market. But could this be an opportunity in some way as well? So we see more of that social realism.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean,
We don't know.
I would doubt it. I mean, I thought what Stephen said then, and he was too modest to say it, but Peaky is an example of something that does it beautifully, and and manages to tell the story of Oswald Mosley within a landscape that feels incredibly relatable to a global audience. I just don't know that everyone has that ability that Stephen does to tell that story in that way that feels like it does reach people like that. And for me, Boys in the Black stuff changed my life. It really did. It changed the way I felt about myself, and it changed the way I felt about my society. And I'm just desperate to make sure that the likes of Alan Bleasdale still have roots to tell these stories.
I suppose, rather maybe foolishly, I don't believe it will happen, and that might be a terrible, terrible, myopic with sleepwalking into terrible fascism, but I feel like it's a empty gesture towards a fictional audience that the government wants to placate in order to look like it's paying attention, while it basically gives money back to rich people, which I think is most of what's going on. So what I feel like is that it probably won't happen, that it's like a gesture, and so I maybe foolishly am not worried about it. But maybe I should be.
And if they are passionate about it, don't privatise Channel 4.
Yeah,
don't
exactly.
say it's Discovery, because that won't help.
Exactly. It's nothing that they're doing feels rooted in any real feeling or opinion or belief or principle. So it's very difficult to take it seriously. I feel like there is a thing that I feel guilt. guilty about, maybe is too strong a word, but I feel very aware of about some of the work that I've done, where I feel like there's a tendency to want to do work in a way they didn't used to be, which does feel like Succession is very quite, elevated world of very, very miserable but very rich people. And I Hate Suzie kind of is a show that I've done with Billy Pipe, but it has at its center a sort of celebrity or semi-celebrity. And I think there is maybe a lack of, or there should be more attention paid to work that I think does feel more specific. But I also kind of feel like the way that art operates is that when there is a lot of a certain kind of thing, when somebody does something that's new and specific and feels like from a different world with truth, it gets huge response. And then that thing becomes copied and there becomes a lot of it. And then when somebody does something from a different world that feels very different from that, that can get a huge response. So I kind of live in the hope of that as well, that the audience will find the art that's good.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering what you guys think audiences are, just to that point as well, are really looking for, because I saw a funny meme about how, Hollywood execs are sort of looking for upbeat stories and, really affirmational stuff. And then Squid Game comes along and, and that's just absolutely brutal. And so is there any sort of formula right now, or is it just nonsense ultimately? Stephen, have you seen Squid Game?
I don't think there's ever been and ever will be a formula for this. I mean, thankfully. I think there is a thing in Hollywood of these something successful, so let's do lots more of them, and that never works, and that lesson is never learned really. And when the new, as you were saying, the new thing comes along and everybody wants to do that. But I think that's probably been true in art for a long time, and I think it is exaggerated and heightened by the fact that it's all driven by the market. But thankfully, good stuff from Britain and from all over the world does break through, and often it's the least expected thing, and it keeps happening, and nobody learns it. But you're going to get something fantastic from Norway that you didn't know was going to come, and it just comes and it's brilliant.
It is really exciting when something like Squid Game, like that element of people saying in a meeting, we can't do that because it will have subtitles or something, suddenly becomes not an argument. And that's always really exciting as a creative, where you're sort of like, aha, that's another thing they can't say now, is always really nice. So yeah, that's enjoyable.
Have you seen Squid Game, Jack?
Yeah.
Have you? Did you finish it?
No, because my wife won't watch it with me anymore, so I've got to watch it on my own. So I've got to find times to watch it on my own.
Did you ever what are your thoughts on it? Do you feel as though we would ever see something like that come out of the UK, for instance, or anywhere? Does it need to be somewhere like Korea?
I've not really considered that. It's just terrific. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just and the brilliant, the way that Ep 2 was handled, I thought was what set it apart. That thing of just going, and I don't want to give away spoilers, but just the way that they just kind of went, okay, this is not going to go the way you expect it to, and this is not going to play out the way you expect it to. I was just like, oh, I'm sitting forward now, because I loved Ep 1, but Ep 2 was where I went, oh wow, this is something special.
Yeah, absolutely. I just sort of, we talked a little bit about sort of the reckoning of last summer as well, but I was just curious, with the Black Lives Matter movement and obviously this push towards diversity and representation in this country that's happening in earnest, I believe now. Does that present an opportunity for you guys as well, especially for those with returning series like Peaky and Succession, to sort of, how are you interweaving, I suppose, some of those topics and issues, and kind of, is that something that's going through your head right now?
I think that the issues are there. I always worry if you're saying, you've got to bring this in, because it's in already. It's already, you just look out the window and that's the world. And so all you got to do, I think, is write about what the world is really like. And Peaky's period, but as you'll see in Series 6, there are some changes happening that begin to introduce another area that isn't because one feels obliged, it's because that's how it is, that's the real thing, and I think all people have to do is stop pretending that the world is a particular way, and it's not, and that ultimately, in the end, that's when it will be diverse, because that's it is diverse. The world's diverse. It's like, you have to just stop pretending that it's not, and that's how it should work, I think.
Yeah, I mean, obviously acknowledging the fact that we're three white writers on the stage. I also had that feeling a little bit with the Whittingdale Britishness comment, of like that double checking of like, because you can never trust, is this a dog whistle, meaning, white shows? Is it sort of a way of saying, don't worry, not everything's going to be diverse forever? It becomes very unpleasant and toxic. Yeah, I mean, my literal answer to how I started approaching this is, one thing I'm struck by is the push for a certain kind of, and I probably used the word inclusion before. I'd say, like there's a certain kind of inclusion happening in front of the camera, or a push for it that is often being driven by very powerful white people at channels, I would say, is my experience. And so I think it's complicated because the crews and the producers that I look at are not as varied as the things they want to see in front of the cameras, which I think is complicated. So for example, when I work with actors generally, I like to, on shows like I Hate Suzie, where I'm show running, I work very, very closely with them in terms of what they feel about their character and what they where they feel their character would go, often in a way that I would in theatre. And that applies to, actors who have different ethnicities or, male or different gender from me generally. Like I like to talk to them about that, and then if it's appropriate, we use elements of that, or if we don't use it, are informed by elements of that when I then write. And that's something I found it has really helped me not feel like a writer who is sort of trying to do something to fulfill something, which I think is very unpleasant and clumsy, but to actually be actor driven in it. So that's how I work with it. I talk at length to actors about what they're being asked to do and how they feel about it.
I haven't had a show as successful as either Succession or Peaky, so I don't feel like I can really contribute. But I thought that the point that Lucy made about behind the camera is so true. If you look at the Creative Diversity Network surveyed the industry about, and sorry to beat the disabled drum again, but I do think it's a really important drum. And if you look behind the scenes, an industry that's supposed to represent, and if you were representing disabled people truly, then there would be 20% representation across all the things, and there isn't 20% in front of the camera, but behind the camera, it gets really bad. It gets 5.6%, I think, behind the camera, and then if you go to executive level, it gets to 3.4%. So 3.4% of executives representing 20% of our country. That's something that we really need to be focusing on.
Absolutely. And your McTaggart lecture, by the way, was fantastic. I think most people here would agree with that. I just wanted to ask a few sort of individual questions as well, kind of a bit more in line with our theme here, but just in terms of things being adapted in various different forms. But Stephen, obviously Peaky, BBC announced that it would be coming to an end. Can you give us an update on Peaky, the latest, I guess, season 6, and also the movie plans?
Yeah, series 6 is shot and almost cut together, and I think it will be spring next year, I think. And then I'm going to write a feature which is going to be shot and set in Birmingham, and that will probably be the end of the road for Peaky as we know it. And then there may be other shows that are related to it that continue, but I don't know yet.
Right, the spin-offs.
Yeah, I hate that word, but yeah.
Sorry.
See, I was trying not to say spin-off.
Is that something that so you would oversee those as well, or the? I
don't know. I mean, I would hope that the baton can be passed on, and it is. I'm trying to use that as part of the thing that I'm doing in Birmingham with the postcodes, where what we're trying to do is basically we'll be offering 20% of the intake of the film school will be paid for. They'll have free tuition, and because it's the postcodes of the central Birmingham, we will be, reflecting the city and trying to give back to the city stuff that we've taken from it. Do you know what I mean? And so that it becomes genuinely a local production using local people as crew and telling local stories, basically.
That's brilliant. Wow. Right. And obviously you've got Spencer, which is, had I saw it in Venice, excellent reviews. It was a real hit. Tell us a little bit about that, because you didn't, obviously the casting happened, the script already existed, and then the casting happened.
Yeah, it's an odd one. Pablo Larraín approached me and asked me if I wanted to do a film about Diana, and it's not anything that's ever struck me or that has ever been something that's on my list of things to do. But I thought that it was just the reaction to the funeral when she died, and the way the British people reacted to her death was very un-English, and I just thought that was something I didn't quite understand. So, and because he's such a great director, so I wrote a script set on over 3 days that I hope sort of tells her story, and and it attracted good talent, and Kristen just absolutely, because the performance of her life is brilliant. It's really good.
Fantastic. Did you watch the Crown at all, sort of in preparation for the season?
I've never seen the Crown or the films about Diana. Not because people I trust tell me how brilliant it is. It's just that I find it very difficult to watch television, to be honest. I do. It's mostly Peppa Pig.
That's amazing. Can you tell us a bit about some of your other projects as well? I've always wanted to ask you about this Robert F. Kennedy biopic, for example. Are you still attached to that?
Blimey. Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult one to get off. I was sort of wanted to do something during the Trump era about a politician who was a proper politician who had values. Very difficult to get off in the States because of whatever. But yeah, it's something I'd really love to do. And we'll see, in the mysterious way of how things go, you never know, and they're out there, and it's like fishing, and you leave them out there, and something goes, and then you really. So who knows if that will go?
Is Matt Damon still involved?
Was Matt Damon involved?
That's a no.
That was my understanding, but maybe not anymore.
Yeah, lots of talk. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Lucy, I was just wondering, actually, congratulations on the next season of Succession coming up in just a couple of weeks' time. Can you tell us a little, because that was, quite a lot of starting and stopping, wasn't it, during the pandemic? Can you, what was that like for you and the writers?
Well, we were lucky enough not to start and stop once we were shooting, which I know a lot of people had, which was really tricky. We actually were supposed to start shooting when the pandemic hit. So for us, it was a very strange gap. After the writer's room and after we had most of our scripts in place, we then had this huge gap before we started shooting. And actually, we ended up rewriting lots in that gap, as you maybe do when you have time. But also as things were changing politically. And there was a conversation at one point where we sort of walked around a park, because we could only be outside, to meet, and said, should we think about COVID? Like, should we have that conversation? And it's interesting to me to think that so little has been literally conveyed about COVID. I mean, I think it goes a little bit back to the producer's fear of things being depressing. But that's sort of interesting to me. And when you also look back at art about the Spanish flu, there's very, very little of it, considering more people died in that than the First World War. And if you think about the levels of representation of that, it's almost forgotten historically until we had this pandemic.
True.
Anyway, I've just been interested in that lately. And so we were kind of lucky in a way, but we just had to wait a very, very long time to shoot. And then when we eventually shot, we shot under extremely strict conditions. So it was, triple masking. It was people walking around looking like astronauts, really, everyone apart from the actors. But what was really interesting about that was seeing a set which is everybody completely covered up, not really able to communicate with each other very effectively, except for the actors. It was like the most intensified version of shooting that I've ever seen, because it would just be people who couldn't really communicate with each other at all, not really being able to joke, just seeing their eyes. And then somebody would come on that was like, oh, that's a human being. That's what human beings are like, because they were in a costume and they were allowed to take their mask off. And they were this incredible, vivid representation the actors became of humans. And everyone was just looking at them as if they were like, wow, look at them talking to each other. And look at like there's a scene where they have to kiss and you're like, oh, that's what we did. And so it became like the most unbelievable version of what filming is anyway, which is just trying to create these vivid moments of humanity whilst we were all just like unable to make eye contact or talk to each other. So that was kind of amazing.
And how has the room sort of evolved as well with different seasons? And do you have a season 4 as well already?
I'm not sure I'm allowed to say.
Ah.
I mean, it's going well, I hope. I don't want to be cocky about it, but we're hoping.
Right. Okay. What about this coming season? What can we sort of, obviously they'll screen a couple of episodes, but what was the main shift? It's a huge, that press conference kind of cliffhanger is massive.
It's, well, one of the many things I admire so hugely about Jesse Armstrong, who show runs it, is he comes into the room at the beginning of every season with like well, this is going to be the bad season, so let's just accept it, right? And it has this very, very sort of lovely, grounded kind of British sort of ethos of like, oh, we've really screwed ourselves here by them liking that bit that we did. What are we going to do? So it's always amazing if it goes well, because everyone's sort of like, oh God, So it's not that you feel a pressure. It's actually he releases that pressure by sort of saying, oh well, what are we going to do? Never mind. The people will just be disappointed. And actually, when you release that pressure, something wonderful happens because you just come up with loads of ideas and you don't really feel, nervous about it in the same way as you would have done otherwise. So yeah, hopefully it's a third. The thing I love about Succession, I say it like that because, of course, I produce and I write on it, but when I watch it, I'm so often watching other people's work that I can feel that sometimes I'm a fan of it as well. Is I feel like it gives you what you want without you knowing exactly that's what it's doing sometimes, and particularly with Jesse's choices narratively, they sometimes feel like, oh, of course that was inevitable, but I didn't see it coming. Partly because they often have the structure of a joke, which is what a joke is. It's he comes from comedy. It has a sense of, oh, of course it's that, but oh, what a lovely surprise. And I think Succession has that too.
It's a brilliant show. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Jack, I wanted to ask as well, in terms of just talking a little bit about adaptations. Your Harry Potter, the Cursed Child, was just smash success. It's obviously one of London's biggest productions in recent years. What about the film adaptation? Is that there was some talk of that going to screen at some point?
If there is one, no one's talked to me about it. So yeah.
Would you be interested in sort of seeing? Could you see that sort of going to a movie adaptation?
I like it on the stage. Do you know what I mean? And I think that thing of double dipping. Do you know what I mean? That you do end up, as a writer, you do end up causing yourself no end of problems. So, obviously if they offer me a load of money, then, do you know what I mean? But they haven't. So I'm fine as I am.
Got it. And you've got Enola Holmes, right, coming for Netflix soon. Yes. Season 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, season 2. I mean, it's just 2.
Yeah.
We're filming at the moment in Hull. Yeah.
Brilliant.
I think it's happening, and I think it's happening partly because because of the movement, but also because of Michaela. And I think what she did with I May Destroy You, it sort of changed the landscape for everything. And I think that thing of a wave being formed, and I do think there is a wave crashing down on the beaches. The trouble is the executives. Do you know what I mean? And I don't mean that in a sort of like let's slam the executive sort of way. But it, what is true for disability representation, it is also true for lots of different types of representation. And as that changes, and it will change, and there are the likes of our Mensa out there that are changing the way that certain things are talked about and that certain ideas of Britishness is talked about, so great change will happen.
I want to pick up on that. One of the things specifically I would say is give more jobs to people like Anne Mensa, in terms of Anne Mensa as a commissioner. She now is head of Netflix drama. She was personally originally greenlit I Hate Suzie at Sky, and she's championed and supported that show. So I'm obviously personally very, very grateful for her. But she has exquisite taste. She's brilliant. She has real power and money. There are not enough executives like that around. Again, I don't want to be like Jack, say, blame this sort of section of the industry. But I think the attitude that's difficult is, I've been around it a number of times. There's an attitude of, we have our show. And sometimes what that almost, I mean, at its worst, I think it means we have our non-white show, actually, which is a complete lack of recognition of, as you say, obviously, the plethora of identities. But also, that's why I'd like to say things like inclusion as well, because it's got a gestural quality to it that I think is really problematic. And of course, there's an education element to that. Like, obviously, there's courses that people empower, but there's also just like give the jobs to people who have a history of recognizing that it's not about having your, show that shows this thing. And I think that's quite a dangerous attitude that does need addressing, even though it's not sort of like conscious or aggressive. It is eventually aggressive for that reason. And also something I was saying earlier, which is I think there is a misunderstanding that just sort of doing blind casting in front of the camera is the same as giving people sort of writing and show running jobs that are really representational. And I think there's a confusion around that is sometimes quite frustrating. I think there are definitely mentoring schemes and things like that I've been involved with that do address that. But as I was saying earlier, I think there's an individualistic thing to that I don't always think is helpful. So sorry, it's like I feel like there's change on an institutional level and maybe even on like production company level that should be happening, that is sometimes happening and is happening a bit more in America. But I think that could go further than it being individuals giving scripts to other individuals who then have to fight for that individual. It sometimes to me feels a little bit like, what are we? Why aren't we doing this in a more sophisticated manner? Sorry if that was a little bit convoluted.
I mean, speaking personally, becoming a writer wasn't the path that was probably planned for me as a consequence of the background and not coming from a family that would produce a writer particularly. But then once one is determined to be a writer, I think that's the first thing is to absolutely know that that's what you are. And then the way in, I mean, it's the questions often asked, it's really, I don't know, practical advice, but I suppose finish whatever it is, and you've got a thing, you've got an object, which is the finished script, and then just keep going and keep going. I mean, that sounds really crap and obvious, which it is, but I suppose if you are a writer and you know you're a writer, you've got a good chance, I think.
I agree. I don't think it is crap and obvious. I would say, Steve, that like the one thing I try and tell students when I teach is that 95% of people don't ever finish anything. So you're already in the 5% if you finish something. And if you've had any like success in writing at all, or had any sort of like help or recognition, you're probably in the top 1% of that 5%. So you have the ability if you do that. And although a lot of people seem to want to write, I suppose what I'm saying is I think that if you really, really commit to it, it's possible to get your stuff read. It brings me to a couple of practical points, because I started in theatre, which, to go back to your question, I feel like I got picked up a bit because I could write dialogue. So I think sometimes it's about, like, if you can do one thing, you get that opportunity to learn how to be better in other areas. And I was lucky because I wasn't very good at the beginning, and hopefully I've got better. But that is sort of very much it was like somebody went, oh, you can do dialogue. So I then got some TV opportunities that I produced work that wasn't very good, but then I learned. And it's that, to also go back to this gentleman's question, it's that period of time after sort of someone's gone, oh yeah, maybe we'll give you a small opportunity, to then getting bigger opportunities. It's that period of time that so many times doesn't get offered in certain sectors. And I feel like that's where the problem is, the opportunity to do work that's not that good to get better. And so I think that's really, really important. And all you have to be undeniable. You have to be somebody who, like, gets their own YouTube. I mean, I think Insecure was, I think she started doing her stuff as her own videos, I think, and you almost have to be undeniable. So eventually somebody goes, oh, this person should be given an opportunity. But that's very hard to do, especially if you're not an actual performer. So I would say definitely finish stuff, and also try and make sure that when you send it to someone who you feel could help you, whether it's like an agent that you're trying to maybe approach, or somebody who's going to mentor you or anything, try and make sure that you really, really feel like it's in the best state that it could possibly be, because most people in the industry will only read something once. And that's sometimes a mistake that people that I mentor, I see make a little bit, which is they're looking for someone to help them, and they're sending it to maybe the wrong person. They should have some help at an earlier stage to then send it to the person who's going to read it quickly once and go, oh, okay, this person can really write. So that's another piece of practical advice I give sometimes.
And don't presume there's one route in. That I'm a nerd and I study things and I study people. But if you look at these people on the panel, and I may be getting this wrong, but Stephen wrote a sitcom called The Detectives, which was really rather brilliant. Then invented a game show. Then made Dirty Pretty Things. Do you know what I mean? There's no sort of do you know what I mean? Rule as to where you go and how you do it. If you look at those three things, the way that they, do you know what I mean? There's no correlation between any of them. They just all came from the same head. Do you know what I mean? And so there's no sort of oh yeah, no, go walk down this path and then you'll be fine. Do you know what I mean? It's all made up.
Yeah, those are all amazing artists that you mentioned. I was talking to Jasmine Lee Jones yesterday about her performance and her experience of it, and she was saying it's kind of tough with audiences at the moment generally. So I don't know whether I suspect that executives are actually approaching people who feel, including Jazz, who they feel have a level already that they can. I suppose it goes back to what I was saying earlier. People who have already proven themselves, they do approach. My concern is that theatre is often the place, actually, which is underfunded, under-respected, that is asked to get people to that level, and then you have the executives turn up and give them work. And it worries me, as I was saying earlier a little bit, for the future, that that's the case, that theatre, which is being kicked repeatedly, financially, and frankly, just biologically at the moment because of the pandemic, is still responsible for giving people opportunities so that then television and film take notice of them. It worries me, yeah.
It's interesting. Good observation. Jack, did you want to add something quickly?
No, just that then what's the route in? Do you know what I mean? From theatre to thing, that I got very lucky. I was employed in a show called Skins. Skins exclusively took people from theatre, and they took people, I did a play at the Bush Theatre, and that's how I got the gig. And there is a sort of clear sort of path there. It's hard at the moment because it's sort of like sink or swim, that you kind of go, if you are Jasmine Lee Jones, who's amazing, do you know what I mean? Where's the next stage? Or is it just you get your show and then, do you know what I mean? And it's really hard. Do you know what I mean? It's really hard to make a telly show. Do you know what I mean? And it's an awful lot of technical stuff that I learned on those shows like Skins and Shameless, and it's just working out where those little stones are, so that it does become possible for someone to make those leaps.
Thank you. I guess we'll wrap it up now, but thank you so much. That was a fantastic panel, and thank you all for being here. Thanks.